Good evening. I'm Patty Robles, your moderator for tonight's Candidate Forum, which is sponsored by the Wayzata Plymouth Area League of Women Voters. The forum rules previously stated continue for Minnesota House 44B. Each candidate will be allowed an opening statement with a maximum of 2 minutes to state his or her experience, platform, and objectives. A 15-minute warning signal will be given before the total time has elapsed. A question and answer period will be held following the opening statements. The answers will be confined to 1 minute unless designated by the moderator. Questions will be answered by the candidates in rotating order. A 15-second warning will be given to the candidates. The candidates will also be given a 2-minute closing statement. And we ask the candidates to please pay attention to the stop sign and stop when their time is up. The candidates for Minnesota House 44B are Patty Acom and Gary Porter. We begin with Patty Acom and her opening statement.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Patty Acom, and I'm the candidate for House District 44B, which represents northern Minnetonka, the southwest portion of Plymouth, and the community of Woodland. I also want to start out by thanking the League of Women Voters, the National Council for Jewish Women, the Jewish Community Action, and also the Northwest Islamic Community Center for hosting the event tonight. And I also want to thank all of you here in the audience, both here and at home. This is a really valuable tool for candidates to connect with voters, so I really thank you for the opportunity. A bit about myself. I was born and raised here in the district, attended Hopkins High School, went on and graduated from the University of Minnesota with a degree in natural resource management. At the university, I met my husband, Craig, who's here with me tonight. After college, we moved to northwestern Minnesota, where we both worked for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. Our 2 boys, Jack and Charlie, were born when we were living in northern Minnesota. And like many of you, we were faced with aging parents. And my mom was still living here in the Twin Cities and started to need help with some of the things with life. And so ultimately, we decided to move back to the Twin Cities, and we made a multi-generational household. My mom lived with us for 13 years until she passed away last year. Our living situation was truly a gift for all of us. Being back in the community, my kids are now attending Hopkins Public Schools, and our oldest just graduated in June. I am very involved in the local schools, in community organizations and local nonprofits. I'm currently in my 3rd term as a at-large city council member for the city of Minnetonka.
Thank you very much. Oh, it goes fast, I know. Gary Porter. We'll hear from Gary
Patty,
Porter.
I wanted to thank you for going through your introduction and mentioning all the different groups. That takes care of my time. So that. Let me say first of all that I do want to thank all the different groups that have sponsored this event tonight. I think it's extremely important that you have the opportunity to be able to see where Patty and myself stand on the various issues, and so you can go into the polling booth and make an intelligent vote in voting for the right person. As I've gone through and gone door to door, one of the things that I've found is that people are extremely upset with the way things are, first of all, going on in Washington, with the mess there, but they're also equally upset with the way the legislators are carrying on in St. Paul. Why can't we get along together? Why can't they get the people's work done? I was in the legislature in North Dakota for 2 terms. One of the things that I developed a reputation for was to be able to work with both sides of the aisle. And as a result, when I ran for re-election the first time, I ended up getting a much bigger margin than I did when I first ran, because Democrats saw that I was willing to work with them, and I was willing to make the moves that were necessary to get things done for the people. I am running because I believe that the tax system in Minnesota needs to be reformed so that Minnesota is able to compete in a much stronger manner on both the national level as well as a worldwide level. I'm running to make sure that that we maintain a strong educational system for our children, both K through 12 as well as higher education. And I'm running because we need to do something about our healthcare system.
Very much. So we're going to start with you, Gary Porter, for the first question. As a House representative, what would you do to protect and defend the rights of persons with disabilities?
Well, I think it's important that people with disabilities have the same access as all the rest of us. And so as a result, going along, I would support what has been done in the past to make sure that continues on. And any other issues that come up in terms of helping people with disabilities, I would be one of the first to step forward to provide legislation as the needs as we become more aware of those needs.
Thank you. Patty Acom.
Thank you. That's a great question, and actually it hits close to home for me. My husband lives with multiple sclerosis, a disability which impacts his life and our life on a daily basis. I think that I will say my work with City Council has been very, we've worked hard to increase accessibility both within our city. We are trying to make our city more walkable, more bikeable, which is also more conducive to those with handicaps. And so I think that accessibility is something that I would continue to work hard to improve.
Thank you. Speaking of health care, the Health Care Access Fund pays for health insurance programs like Minnesota Care and Minnesota Medical Assistance, along with other important community health grants and other programs around health disparities. The primary funding source for the Health Care Fund is a 2% tax on healthcare providers, and it's set to expire at the end of 2019. Do you support a sustainable, long-term funding source for the Health Care Access Fund, whether that would be extending the provider tax or replacing it with a new funding source? And we'll start first with Patty Acom.
Well, thank you. I think for all of our healthcare needs, we need long-term sustainable funding streams. And so I absolutely support extending the provider tax to provide that for our healthcare. And so, yes, I support that. I support extending it, excuse me.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same. I think we need to extend it and make sure that it's permanent so that people who are in need know that the health care is going to be there when they need it.
Thank you. We're going to stick with healthcare for one more question. With health insurance premiums being out of reach for many Minnesotans, what would your plan to be to bring the plans to the public so that they have one that's at least as good as those offered to the legislature? Please be specific. And we'll start with Gary Porter.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, we need to go through health insurance and start to take a look at the mandates. There are a lot of things that are mandated in health insurance because of all the private interest groups that have come in over the years, and they're not necessary, and they've caused the health insurance premiums to go up as a result. And so that's one thing that I would do is to sit down and go through all of the mandates and see which is important, which isn't. I think we also have to take a look at providing a little bit more of what's known as a cafeteria of plans, so that you're getting a plan that meets your needs, not the plan that meets all the needs. So for example, if you're an elderly person, you don't necessarily need a plan that's going to provide for pregnancy. And if you're younger, you're not going to need a plan that's going to provide for senior citizen care. So I think these things we need to take a look at if we're going to be able to get our health insurance in line.
Thank you. Patty Acom?
Thank you. This is a really important question. It's probably, as I've been out door knocking, certainly the issue that I hear the most about. And I will say, as a breast cancer survivor, I know firsthand how important it is to have access to good quality and affordable health care. And so as I think about how we work to make our system more affordable and accessible to others, I think that expanding the Minnesota Care, opening it to others for an alternative, because I hear way too many people who are spending way too much out of pocket in premiums and copays, and we need to do better. And people deserve to have good quality care. I believe it's a right that we all deserve.
Thank you. Patty Aiken, we'll start with you first. And what measures do you favor, if any, to combat climate change? What measures could you as a state representative propose that would have an impact on climate change?
Thank you. That's a really great question. With my background in education and environmental work, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Our climate is changing. We can see that in events like the rain we have today and the extreme weather events that are hitting many people around the world. I have worked hard with the city of Minnetonka to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels by getting us involved in community solar. So not only is it saving our environment, but it's also saving our taxpayers $21 million over the 25 years of the contract. So it's a win-win. I think that's just one example of the many things that we can be doing to address climate change.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
I agree. I think renewable fuels are extremely important in terms of coming about with climate change. But one of the things I think we need to do in terms of the science of climate change, and that is that we have got to make sure that what we are doing is really going to get the job done. The Paris Agreement, and I think the agreement before that, one of the things that disappointed me was that this was a compromise that was worked out. Nobody knows whether these standards that were set are actually going to work. And I think it's important that we make sure that we provide the funding for the science to make sure that we know what we have to do to bring about climate change in the world today and make it safe for all of us. Because just to take a pie in the sky and say, well, this is going to be the standard because they've all agreed on it, that isn't going to solve the problem.
Thank you. Gary Porter, we'll start with you first. 7 states and the District of Columbia currently authorize medical aid in dying, which allows terminally ill, mentally capable adults to request and receive medication they can self-administer to bring about a peaceful death should their suffering become unbearable. Would you support legislation to authorize medical aid in dying in our state?
That is a good question, and it's a tough moral question. I mean, I've when I was in the legislature before, I kind of fought back and forth as to how to handle this. And I guess you have to take a look in terms of what you would want. In other words, I'm saying myself, if I were in a situation where I faced dying and there was no other alternative. I went through this, although not quite the way the questioner is asking, with my wife when she was dying of pancreatic cancer. She had the chance to take chemo, which probably would have kept her alive for maybe a couple of more months and would have been agony. But she decided that for the couple of months it just wasn't worth it. And so as a result, she let it take its course. That was legal. But I think we also have to take a look at making it legal for other people to want to let it take its course in terms of moving up an eventual death.
Thank you. Patty Aiken?
Thank you. I first just want to say, Gary, I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
What a difficult time. I will say that I think a person's health care choices should be a decision between the patient and the doctor. And I think that it is a difficult and challenging moral decision and not one that I would want to make for others. And so I think that I would want to look into this further, but it feels to me that decision should be one made between a patient and their doctor.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Patty Aiken, first. Would you support dedicating more state funding for effective tobacco prevention and cessation programs in Minnesota? And do you support raising the tobacco sales age to 21 statewide if you were elected in the legislature?
Well, funny you should ask, because on the Minnetonka City Council on Monday night, we voted to raise the tobacco age to 21. And so I am thrilled that we were able to pass that in Minnetonka, and I know Plymouth did as well. And so I feel as though the wave is coming. I think some of these issues are much better handled on a statewide basis. I think this is one, but it takes getting to a tipping point, I think, for the whole state to go. So I am 100% behind raising the tobacco age to 21. I think that we are seeing an epidemic of e-cigarette use with our young people, and we need to do whatever we can to curb that, to discourage that, and to prevent young people from starting smoking in the first place. So absolutely, I'm for increased funding.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
I think we'd have to agree on that one, that the smoking age should be raised to 21 on a statewide level, although I think it's important that we enforce the law on top of it. The other thing I think is that putting more funding into prevention, if it's just going to be advertising, then I don't know whether I would support that or not, because we've got a lot of advertising going on right now. It has worked some, but I think it's important that we look at other ways of educating our young people to get off smoking.
Thank you. We'll start with you first, Gary Porter. College is increasingly expensive. What are your plans if you get into the legislature to help make it more affordable?
Well, when I was in the legislature before, I was a very strong proponent of funding our higher education. And I think the problem I saw at that time is that we were pricing the middle class out of a college education. And it's not any better today. In fact, it's even worse. Somebody was telling me about a joke that, they thought it was wonderful. This fellow was celebrating his 100th birthday, and at the same time, he was also celebrating having paid off his college education. And I think that is something that can't continue. And if we're going to get the costs down, I think, first of all, the legislature needs to provide more funding for higher education so that we can get that taken care of. And I also think we need to look and see where duplication is at so that we can knock some of that out as well in trying to get the costs of education down.
Thank you. Patty Acom.
Yes. Education, especially college education, is becoming increasingly expensive, and our young people, they need more than just a high school diploma these days to be successful. And so costs are absolutely a barrier to many. And I think there are a number of ways that we can work to lower those costs. I think we can incentivize savings for families. We can increase aid to students. We can increase opportunities for college credit in K-12. We can reform our student loans to lower their cost. And we can utilize loan forgiveness programs and find other ways to lower cost of tuition of public higher and education institutions. So I think it's very important, and I would work very hard for that.
Thank you. We'll start first with Patty Acom. What would you do to help solve the affordable housing issue? What specific plans do you have?
You know, affordable housing is an issue that I work with on the city council on a regular basis. I have been a strong advocate for affordable housing in our community. It's important that for the stability of our communities, that we have a diversity of housing types, that we have housing that will be able to be affordable for working class people who are teachers in our schools, and firemen and policemen, and people who work in the service industry within our community. So affordable housing is a big issue. At the city, the things that I have done to work to encourage it are to to use tax increment financing, to have inclusionary housing projects so that a portion of each multi-unit housing development includes affordable housing units. And we also have some single-family projects that are in the works as well.
Gary Porter?
Affordable housing is an extremely important issue. One thing, in order to attract new business, you have to also have housing for the people who are going to work for that business. And so it is something which is becoming more and more an issue as time goes on. I keep thinking about what houses cost when I was starting out. You know, a $100,000 house was a mansion, and it's far from that today. In order to make sure that housing is affordable, we also have to make sure that we're not destroying neighborhoods at the same time with heavier traffic and so forth. So hitting that middle ground is what is also important. And I think tax incentives are something that we need to look at. I think increasing the inventory is another thing we need to look at for affordable housing. And these are the types of things that I would work for. But this is definitely an issue that I look at as a major priority.
Thank you. Gary Porter, we'll start with you first. A Minnesota poll in April of this year showed a strong majority, 56% to 31%, favoring stricter gun laws in the U.S. individual measures, such as raising the age limit to buy guns or banning assault weapons, and garnered as much or more support in the poll. Do you support or oppose requiring criminal background checks on every gun sale? Please explain your position, and what other measures would you support with respect to protecting the public from gun violence?
One of the problems with gun control is everybody talks about common sense gun control, and they talk about background checks. And the fact of the matter is that when you take a look at every one of the tragedies that have happened, and especially in the schools, the person with the gun had a background check, got the gun, and did what he did. That's the problem with gun control today, is finding what is going to work. What I've seen presented so far, I would oppose, primarily because I don't think it will work. And I've looked at some states that have gone the extra mile, and the problem is they can't enforce the law. They don't have the wherewithal to enforce the law. And so if we're going to bring about so-called common sense gun control, let's find something that's going to work, and let's find something that we can all support.
Thank you. Patty Acom?
Thank you. I think this is one issue that will draw a clear distinction between my opponent and I. Gun violence prevention is probably one of the main reasons that I decided to run for this seat. I think that we have seen way too many incidents happen in our schools and in our communities, and we need to do, we absolutely need universal background checks. And we need to give law enforcement the authority to remove guns from the people that they think are a danger to themselves or others and are unfit. And finally, I think we need to do more to provide mental health services in our community.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Patty Acom, first. What would you do to make sure that all women in Minnesota have access to quality reproductive health care?
Well, as a women's health issues are very important to me as a breast cancer survivor, and I know firsthand how important it is that we have the opportunities to receive those health services. And so I, as a pro-choice candidate, I'm proud to be endorsed by Planned Parenthood, Emily's List, and Women Winning. I think that a woman's reproductive choices in life are really those to be made between her and her doctor.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
Well, as far as supporting women's health care, I think that's a no-brainer. I think we have to do that. And I think that in terms of what goes on between a woman and a woman, I can't get it out yet, a woman and her doctor is between a woman and her doctor. And so as far as I'm concerned, the issues that are out there, I would support in terms of providing for better health care for women.
Thank you. Gary Porter, we'll start with you first. Explain why you would or would not support restoring the right to vote to citizens living in the community on probation or parole due to felony conviction.
Well, obviously, if they're in jail, they don't have the right to vote. But I do think that as part of the rehabilitation of a individual, that in time, and I don't know how much time, I think that would be more to study that I would have to do. But I do eventually feel that once a person is a good citizen in the community, again, that right to vote should be restored.
Thank you. Patty Acom?
I think that obviously while in jail, a person doesn't have the right to vote. And I also think that once they have served their time and proven themselves to be worthy of release and back into society, I believe they should be able to earn that ability to vote back.
Right, thank you. Patty Acom, do you support independent redistricting done on a bipartisan basis with community participation?
You know, I think this is a really important issue, and it's going to be really important in the next legislature. In 2020, we'll redistrict, and so this is a very pertinent, timely issue. I absolutely support a bipartisan, independent committee or body that would oversee redistricting.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
I think the problem with the bipartisan committee is, first of all, who's going to appoint the members to the committee? If the legislature appoints so many and the governor appoints so many, we're back to the same problem as having legislators perform the process. So how we do it is very important if we go into some kind of a commission to do reapportionment. It is the legislature's responsibility. I think and in Minnesota, with the court standing in the background, ready to move in the event that we do see an extensive amount of gerrymandering going on, I think the process is working.
Right. Thank you. Gary Porter, what do you think is the biggest concern facing the public schools in your district? And what are your thoughts on public money being used to partially fund private schools?
Well, I think first of all, probably in the district, we are lucky to have an extremely good educational system. But it's always been my belief that we need to provide the funding in the classroom to pay our teachers what they deserve. Our teachers are the most important part of education, because if they fail, that means our children will fail, which means our country will fail. We need the economic soldiers to man our industries, and we need the leadership that comes out of the next generation. And without good teachers, that's not going to happen. So I certainly favor that as an important part of the educational process. What did you say the second part was again?
I don't remember. I'm so sorry. I put the question down.
Money going
yes,
to the private schools.
That's right, sorry.
All right, my time is almost up, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that part. But I do think there are times when money should go into private schools, and I'll tell you when. And that is that those people who want to send their children to a religious school, because I'm a firm believer in church and state separate,
All right.
that I think that in that case, the parents who want to send their children to a school to get a religious education
Thank you, Gary.
should be able to do that.
I gave you a little extra time there because I stole it from you.
Right.
Here we go.
All right.
Patty Acom.
I'm a great believer in our public education system, and I'm a product of that education system. One of the challenges is our state funding has not kept up with the inflation, and 97% of our schools are dependent on school levies. And that funding contributes to disparities amongst our schools and kids around the state. So I think that's a problem. And the issues that need to be addressed are issues like our special education funding, closing the achievement gap, making schools safe, and providing more mental health resources for our students. And I will say I am proud to be endorsed by our teachers and Education Minnesota.
Thank you. And back with the education question, we'll start with you, Patty Acom. What specific ideas do you have with, in regards to funding initiatives such as early childhood education and some of the other important parts that you spoke about?
So I will say this, that early childhood education is incredibly important, not only for children, but for families. When we lived in northern Minnesota, we lived in kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so we didn't have a neighborhood per se. So we participated in early childhood family education programs for our kids. And it became our neighborhood since we didn't have one. But it was a savior not only for my kids, but for me as a mom, as a new mom. And so I think the early childhood programs that we offer here in Minnesota are incredibly valuable. They are shown and proven to make incredible improvements in kids' outcomes and make them ready for kindergarten. So they help with the achievement gap, and so I would work hard to expand those and work to improve them as well.
Thank you. Gary Porter.
I think early childhood education is important, but I don't think we should be paying for it across the board. I think we should provide subsidies for those who are in the low income brackets. Those who can afford it, I think, should have to pay for it. I think if we are going to put money into something, I think it would be important to put it more into childcare so that working mothers have the ability and know that their children are going to be well taken care of. I would rather see the money go in for that, and then possibly using the child care for early childhood development as well.
Thank you. And we'll start with Gary Porter first. Investments are needed to maintain roads and bridges like the ones that are being replaced all over that we see every day. Do you support additional gas tax to fund roads, bridges, and transits? Why or why not?
I think a gas tax should only be used as a last resort. If we're talking surpluses in the state government, then I don't think we need a gas tax in order to get that done. It's important that we work on our roads and bridges, especially in Minnesota where we've had problems with bridges. And every state has got a lot of bridges that need to be fixed, and that's something that we need to look at. Where the funding comes from, I think that would be decided once we get to the legislature.
Thank you. Patty Acom.
Thank you. Transportation is an important issue, as Gary pointed out, especially here in Minnesota with the state of our infrastructure. We're currently $6 million short over the next 10 years in funding our roads and bridges. And in the next, between now and 2040, we're expected to get 800,000 new people moving into our state. So that's only going to make the problem more difficult. So we need to find more innovative ways of funding beyond the gas tax. Our gas tax, as our cars become more fuel efficient and battery operated, the gas tax becomes a little bit obsolete. We need to work hard to invest in our multimodal transit system. I'm a big supporter of the Southwest Light Rail, and we also need to work to expand our bus rapid transit because we're not going to ever be able to build enough roads and bridges to accommodate all the people.
All right, thank you. We'll start with you, Patty. Patty Acom first. Given the rankus atmosphere in politics lately, talk about your plans on working in a bipartisan way, getting bipartisan support on some of the initiatives that are important to you.
Well, thank you. I will say, as I have been out door knocking, one of the issues or one of the things people will often say is, why do you want to do this? There's so much anger and hostility, and I've seen from my nonpartisan role at local government that people that span the partisan divide can work together and cooperate and coordinate on important issues that are that we're expected and that we deserve to make those decisions for our voters and our residents, really not our voters, everybody. So I've had that experience at the local level, working on a bipartisan, nonpartisan way, and I know I can take that same spirit to St. Paul to serve our district.
Thank you. Gary Porter?
Well, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, I have the experience of working in a bipartisan manner. I did it in the North Dakota Legislature, and I can do it again in Minnesota. And it's just a matter of finding the people on the other side of the aisle who agree with you, sitting down and working and getting legislation done. You're not always going to get what you want. They're not always going to get what they want. But if we can sit down and instead of going with the idea of gotcha politics where we're going to get you, so in the next election we can use that against you, that isn't the way to get things done. And I didn't do it that way when I was working before, and I won't do it that way this time around. I believe that I have the background and the willingness to work in a bipartisan fashion as I did in North Dakota.
Right. Thank you. Gary Porter, we'll start with you, and I believe this is going to be our last question. What kind of policies, ideas, initiatives will you pursue to promote social and racial justice in our community?
Well, equality and racial justice has always been an issue that's been very strong to me. As far as making sure, we have to make sure that we have the laws that the laws we have are enforced to make sure that racial equality is maintained. And I think basically we have the laws in the books today. It's a matter of providing the personnel. It's a matter of going out and getting the work done. But as far as allowing any kind of discrimination to go on whatsoever, whether it's by race or by gender or whatever, or by sexual persuasion, it is important that we have a society that believes in equality for all.
Thank you. Patty Acom?
Well, thank you. I think this is a great question to end on. I think that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in our community to ensure that everyone has racial and social justice. I think that I look at our schools in particular, and we have a lot of work to do on closing that achievement gap. I think that there are a lot of opportunities within our community as a whole to ensure that everyone feels welcome. We are a community that is changing, and I think that change is our strength, and we need to build upon that.
Thank you. I'll now call on you for your closing statements. You'll have 2 minutes each. We're going to start with Patty Acom first.
I'm going to talk quicker this time. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, the National Council for Jewish Women, and the Jewish Community Action for hosting this forum. I also want to thank Gary Porter for the great conversation tonight, and thanks to all of you in the audience, both here and at home, for your interest in this race. I'm running to be your next state representative because I'm invested in this community. I've lived here for over 40 years, and I've shown commitment by being involved in our schools, community organizations, and local nonprofits. I also have experience serving the last 7 years on the Minnetonka City Council and representing our community on policy committees at the local, regional, state, and national levels. I understand the issues that are important to all of us, including the environment, education, healthcare, and the economy. I believe my experience in local government has taught me how to work with a wide variety of people with very different perspectives to get things done. I've worked hard to make things better for our families and neighbors, and I know what is important to our community and have the experience to represent our values in St. Paul. I ask for your vote on November 6th, unless tomorrow is convenient. Early voting starts tomorrow. And for more information about my campaign, you can find that at pattyacom.com. Thanks for tonight.
Thank you. Gary Porter.
Well, again, I want to thank all the groups that put this together tonight. I want to thank you for coming out in this with this beautiful weather. If you're a duck, I'm sure you enjoyed it. I am running, as I said before, because I think it's important for our economy that we reform our taxes. I think education is extremely important. When I was in the legislature before, education was my number one issue. I worked hard to make sure that we had strong funding so that we could get this done. And another area which wasn't mentioned tonight is dealing with special education, which costs our school systems an extreme amount of money. The federal government promised us 40%, to take care of 40% of the cost, and it's never come much even close. I think it's running roughly around 18%. I think it's time for our Attorney General and the Attorney Generals across this country to sue the federal government to provide the money for these people and this important entity, and getting education for our socially our physically and mentally handicapped people. Healthcare is an extremely important issue as well. We need to get our health costs in line. We need to get our premiums in line without the large deductibles that go along with it. I believe very passionately in the issues I talk about. I believe I can provide the voice, the strong voice that's necessary in the legislature to get that done. I did it before, I can do it again. And so in ending, I say, we can do better. And working together, we will do better.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking both of our candidates for coming tonight.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, yes.
In closing, I forgot. This is a terrible thing that I did. I want to introduce my daughter who is here tonight, Heidi Geller.
Hi, Heidi.
Well, you corrected that. So
All right, thank you.
So thank you to our audience, both present and viewing, as well as the participants for being here tonight. Thank you to the City of Plymouth for allowing us to use their City Council chambers. Thank you to the Voter Services team for organizing the event, and the LWV members and students from Wayzata for their help. Thank you to Northwest Community Commission for taping tonight's forum. Replay times are as followed. Saturday, September 22nd at 1 p.m., Sunday, September 23rd at 7 p.m. There'll also be on-demand viewing, web streaming at ccxmedia.org. It will also post it on our various social media accounts for the League of Women Voters Wayzata Plymouth area and on YouTube. So you can send it to everybody you know, so they can view it too. Please remember to vote on Tuesday, November 6th, or as Patty Aiken mentioned, early voting starts tomorrow through November 5th. And the candidates will be available, hopefully, for a few minutes following, if anyone would like something to discuss something further with them. Thank you again for coming. We thank our partners, Jewish Community Committee, Committee for Action, National Council of Jewish Women, and the Northwest Islamic Community Center. The League of Women Voters welcomes new members, both men and women. Please visit our membership table in the entry area. Thank you so much.